Ever wonder if a tiny desktop can actually replace a full-size tower for a small office or home-based business? Who will get the most out of a compact machine that packs an i5-135000H, 64 GB of RAM and a 2 TB SSD, and who should simply walk away? And, with a price tag that sits in the mid-range for business-class hardware, is it truly worth it for everyday users who just need a reliable workhorse? Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. If you've ever tried to cram a bulky workstation onto a cramped desk, you know the frustration of cords, heat, and the constant need to upgrade. That's the exact pain point the Lenovo IdeaCentre Business Mini aims to solve. It's a cube the size of a hardcover book, yet it claims to hold enough power for multitasking, data-heavy work, and even light creative duties. The first question you should ask yourself is whether the trade-offs that come with a mini-format limited expansion slots, restricted cooling, and a fixed set of ports align with how you actually use a computer. Let's start with the kind of people who will feel right at home with this box. If you run a small consulting firm, a remote learning setup, or a home office where the desktop sits next to a laptop, the compact footprint is a massive win. The i5-135000H brings 12 cores and 16 threads, which translates into smooth performance for office suites, video conferencing, and even moderate spreadsheet crunching. Combine that with a massive 64 GB of DDR5 RAM and a 2 TB PCIe M.2 SSD, and you have a device that won't choke when you leave dozens of browser tabs open while juggling a spreadsheet and a CRM. The inclusion of Windows 11 Pro is also a plus for business users who need BitLocker encryption, remote desktop, and group policy controls without having to upgrade the OS themselves. Now, who should probably skip this mini? If you're a gamer looking to squeeze high refresh rate titles onto a 1080p monitor, or a video editor who needs multiple GPU-accelerated streams, the lack of a dedicated graphics card and the small cooling envelope will be a bottleneck. Likewise, if you anticipate needing more than one or two external displays, you'll run into the limitation of a single HDMI port and one USB-C that doubles as DisplayPort. The design does not accommodate a second GPU or additional storage bays, so expanding beyond the built-in SSD will require external enclosures or network-attached storage, which adds cost and complexity. Let's talk through a typical workday scenario for a small business owner. Morning, you fire up a Teams call, pull up Outlook, and have a few tabs of industry news open. The 64 GB of RAM means the system never feels like it's out of memory, even after hours of continuous use. Midday, you open a couple of PDFs, a large Excel file with macro-driven calculations, and perhaps a light Photoshop edit of a logo. The i5-135000H, despite being a mobile-grade processor, handles the load without noticeable throttling because the SSD's read/write speeds keep data flowing quickly. Afternoon, you need to back up client files. The 2 TB SSD gives you enough space to store a week's worth of work locally, and you can offload to cloud storage later. The Ethernet, RJ45, port ensures a stable wired connection for large file transfers, which is a relief compared to the sometimes spotty Wi-Fi on laptops. Evening, you shut down the machine, and because the chassis is small, it fits into a narrow closet or a shelf without crowding the room. On the flip side, the small form factor does come with a trade-off in thermal headroom. Reviewers who have measured temperatures on similar mini PCs note that under sustained high-load scenarios, think long-duration rendering or bulk data processing, the CPU can hover around 80 C. That's not a deal-breaker for most office tasks, but it does mean you shouldn't expect the machine to stay silent under heavy workloads. The fans are audible, and in a quiet office they can become a subtle background hum. If you're planning to run the unit 24/7 in a noise-sensitive environment, that's something to keep in mind. Another practical weakness lies in the port selection. 3 USB 3.2 Type-A ports, a single USB-C, and one HDMI output cover the basics, but they limit flexibility if you need to plug in a printer, a scanner, and a webcam simultaneously. You'll likely need a USB hub, which adds another piece to your setup. The lack of an SD card slot or Thunderbolt support also narrows the options for fast external storage. For many office users, a hub is a small price to pay, but it's an extra cost that isn't obvious when you first glance at the spec sheet. What about value for money? The headline specs i5-13500H, 64GB RAM, 2TB SSD sound extravagant, and the price reflects that. However, when you compare it to buying a traditional desktop tower and adding each component individually, the Mini actually saves you a few $100s in chassis and power supply costs, and you avoid the clutter of a large tower. The built-in Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth provide modern wireless connectivity without needing separate adapters. For a small business that